Builders, backstories, breakthroughs. This is The Journey in Conversation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Journey in Conversation. In the virtual studio with me today, I am privileged to have with me Nate Littlewood, who is the founder of Future Ready CFO. Nate, how are you doing?
I am doing very well, thank you, sir. How are you?
Quite well. Here in Canada, we got 55 centimeters of snow on Sunday, so we're all kind of just staying at home. We're buried in.
You beat us here in New York. We're a few inches short of that, but yeah, it's really brought the place to a gridlock of late.
Yeah, and it's funny how much you when you get a weather event like that, the city's just not prepared for. It's funny how it takes a few days for public transit and for like the roads and everything to get cleared up. I know here in Toronto, we have trams, light rail that kind of runs along the road, right, to augment our metro system, which is nothing compared to New York City's metro system. But what ends up happening here is you get snow piled up on the road and people are still trying to park on the same streets. But because of the snow, the cars are kind of pushed out, and the light rail that runs on those fixed tracks, like they just kind of go and they can't get by the cars and they have to sit there and honk their horn until somebody comes out of the shop and moves their car, and you can kind of move on after that.
Yeah. A bit of a nightmare.
Well, let's start off the show with a bit of a chit chat about you. I like to ask guests who are on, what's your origin story, whether it's a supervillain or superhero kind of lens on it. But tell the folks at home, like, where have you come from? What are you doing? Like, what's your background?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I am currently working on a fractional CFO consulting business and have been at this for a couple of years. Basically, what I do is help founders in the e-commerce and CPG or consumer packaged goods space bring clarity to their financials, and so that they can make better decisions and essentially sleep better at night. Scale more profitably and with less stress. The path to getting here, however, was not super conventional. As you may have already deduced, I grew up in Australia, Western Australia more specifically, which is a huge resources part of the world. Oil and gas and mining are pretty huge there. Actually studied engineering for my undergrad and worked in the mining industry for about 4 years before pivoting in getting into the world of finance. I landed a job with an investment bank, moved over to Melbourne, actually spent a couple of years living in Toronto. I used to be by the St. Lawrence markets downtown. And then moved down here to New York in about 2013. And since being here, I spent a little bit of time still in the finance industry working for the bank. But around 2015, I left that, started my own e-commerce business, which was kind of a mission purpose-led gardening startup. We were focused on like urban and indoor gardening. And nowadays, I am, working as a fractional CFO, helping other founders, scale and build their businesses. So, career pivots is something I've been through a few of. Personal reinventions is something I've done a few times, and more recently have had, a fair bit of experience and practice at just, personal brand building and having to think about marketing and sales and customer acquisition and all that sort of stuff.
That's interesting. I find that more and more as businesses are spinning up, and particularly with businesses that are bootstrapping, you need access to that specialized expertise and talent from someone who's spent, a decade, 2 decades working in a particular discipline and building their skills to really advise them and help them navigate. And fractional leadership is emerging as something that is quite good for those small scaling businesses, because you can draw on that expertise, but still carry that expertise in the business without having to also carry the overhead and the obligations that go with hiring a full-time C-suite executive, because it can easily get into $250,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year for a talented C-suite person. And a business that's starting out with $1 million in seed capital, perhaps that doesn't make any financial sense for them to carry that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
good for you. Do you find that that's kind of a bit of a normal story with the clients that you work with? Like they're kind of on the smaller side. They're trying to figure out how to scale. They want your expertise, but full time doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. Like, is that a thing for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the most common point at which I meet my clients is they have been in business for a few years. They've been working hard as ever, long hours, they're putting everything into their company, but they are becoming fatigued or disappointed or underwhelmed by the financial outcomes that they're generating. So, what they're able to pay themselves or the profitability or what's accumulating in their bank account just doesn't seem to be correlating with the amount of effort and work that they're putting in. And that, when I look at my client base today, is probably what almost all of them have in common. And, they've just gotten frustrated by that. And like, what's the point in working so hard if I'm not getting the financial rewards for this work? And that's basically where I start pretty much all of my client relationships.
Yeah, it's a common theme. When you think about the business owner that's in a small and growing business, they've got all of the overhead, the payroll, everything to pay. And I find a lot of folks who are in that particular position, they don't even really think about paying themselves a salary. It's more so, hey, I'm going to take a draw with whatever's left over. And sometimes there is not really a lot left over. Like I find that restaurants in particular kind of suffer from this when it's one or two locations. They really get locked into that trap. What's kind of some of the advice that you give to the business owner who's in that position? Like, commonly I've heard, hey, pay yourself a salary, make yourself a salaried employee, and take dividends if there are profits, et cetera, et cetera. But what do you say to that business owner who comes to you and says, I'm not making any money? What's wrong with this?
Yep. Excellent question. Happens all the time. I don't know that, when I first start working with them, I'm not sure that any of my clients are really satisfied with the consistency or the magnitude of what they're paying themselves. So the way that I think about it is really two things. First of all, we need to understand what is the kind of value of your time. And for a lot of founders, that revolves around the concept of opportunity cost, right? These are intelligent, usually well-educated, ambitious, very capable people. And if they were not doing what they're doing at their startup, their business, they'd probably have a very comfortable six-figure job doing something else. And when you're looking at, the time and effort you're putting into your startup, if you're only paying yourself, whatever, $5-6 grand a month, then there's a very significant time opportunity cost that you're investing here. And so we need to just be mindful of that. Okay. Where I really focus is on helping people generate the return to justify the investment that they're making. And so the common mistake that I see with my founders and clients is that they're usually just doing too many things, distracted by too many shiny objects. They're trying to do absolutely everything, and they lack a focus and concentrated effort on a small number of priorities that are really needed to move the business forwards. So I usually start my engagements, like I'll get on the onboarding call, and we'll say, tell me what's going on. What are you trying to do here? And they'll tell me about TikTok Shop and Instagram and new product launches and new sales channels and cost reductions and blah, 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 blah. There's usually a list of a couple of dozen things. But then we go through a 3-step process, or I have 3 different frameworks that I apply to bring focus and clarity to that list. The first is fairly financially oriented. I'll use return on investment, or ROI type math, which is basically looking how much earnings or EBITDA can this opportunity generate, and what is it going to cost us, either in time, money, or both, i.e. that's the investment part. And so how does that return that we can generate compare to the investment that we're putting on the table? So that, like, just, I guess it's a materiality filter, right? Like, how big and significant are some of these opportunities? The next thing we'll do is a bottleneck analysis, right? Everyone's familiar with the concept of a bottleneck. And in businesses like my clients run, you can apply the bottleneck framework in many different ways. One example is you could look at how traffic flows through a website, right? You have a website visitor, multiplied by a conversion rate. That tells me how many purchases you get, multiplied by an average order value. That tells me how much revenue you generate on first orders. Multiply that by a repeat customer rate, tells me, how many times people come back. And, you can do the math and figure out how much income the business is generating. Or the way you'd use a bottleneck analysis here is basically benchmark each of those things, right? So if I'm looking at a business that's got, 0.9% conversion rate, and I know that all the peers are doing 2.5 or 3, then we have a massive conversion rate problem. And if we could fix that conversion rate problem, we would double or triple the revenue of the business, right? It's the bottleneck that's holding us back. Another example, one of my clients right now, we have a warehousing bottleneck. We've turned on paid ads. We've grown revenue so quickly that they have literally run out of capacity in their own warehouse. There's not enough room on the shelf to put all the product, and they're struggling to, bring stuff in and get stuff out the door, right? So now we have a physical bottleneck. We need to figure out how to store and ship more products. So from a finance perspective, the highest, bang for your buck you're going to get is when you focus on the bottleneck in your process, right? You remove the bottleneck, the entire process is going to have more volume flowing through it. The third framework I use is really about skills alignment. So I'm looking at all of the different tasks that we're doing and basically plotting them on 2 axes. The first is, how good at this are you? How practiced and competent are you? And how much energy does it give you? In other words, how excited are you going to be about doing this task? I'm obviously looking for tasks and projects that are high on both axes. And the reason for that is part of my job as a fractional CFO is to help put projects and opportunities in front of my founders where they can kick them into the goal, right? I want my clients to kick goals. It doesn't help anyone if I put a bowling ball in front of them and tell them to kick it 200 yards, because they're going to break their toe and it's not going to go 200 yards and get in the goalpost, right? So that's just a waste of time. So what we have here, firstly, ROI, how material is this to the financials? Bottleneck analysis tells us where are we going to get the most bang for buck and how can we improve the flow rate through the business? And the third is looking at how well equipped are we as a team or you as a founder to actually solve this problem, right? If you're an operations guru and you're good with numbers and spreadsheets, it's no use, me telling you that, hey, you need to work on your ad creative for Facebook because your Instagram channel sucks or something. You're not going to be very good at that. You're a numbers guy. And so, that would be a project that I'd, probably say we can defer for a bit. So what we achieve by this is we might start with a list of 20 or 30 different projects and opportunities. And by passing them through these frameworks, we distill it down to 2 or 3. And then those 2 or 3, we basically put into a OKR, or objective and key result. It's essentially like a goal setting framework, which helps us stay accountable for it, make progress on these things. And it's basically that, rinse and repeat, helping people get focused on the things that are really going to move the business forwards.
Yeah, and that highlights the difference between strategic finance and operational finance, right? You kind of think of different types of accountants anyway. I do. And there's your accountant that you call in to do your taxes. There's the accountant that you call in to do your books, the bookkeeper. But then there are certified management accountants. And those are the folks that really focus on looking at the big picture, like what you're talking about, and going through the bottleneck analysis and saying, all right, let's look at the entire business. Let's figure out how we can grow the business, what the pieces are, what the gaps are, what we need to invest in that will really make a big difference for the entire thing. So folks at home, looking at the business from a finance perspective, end to end, that can often solve a lot of your problems that you think are isolated and siloed on very specific topics.
Yep. Absolutely.
I want to pivot a little bit, Nate, and talk about your urban gardening startup. That's
Sure.
something that it's a topic that I'm quite interested in myself. Like, I'm a gardener. I love urban gardening. Live
Yeah.
in a high density building, have a balcony, plant plants and whatnot. Tell me a bit about that. The business, I assume, was an e-commerce business. Like, what were you selling? What were you trying to do with that business?
Yeah, yeah. So after about a decade working in finance, I had a bit of a crisis of identity, I guess. For a lot of that time, I'd really struggled with, what was the purpose, what is the mission of all this? But frankly, when you're getting paid bucket loads of money and they're sending you all over the world to do it, it's like you can push those thoughts to the back of your head. But by 2015, those thoughts were getting louder and louder. And I'm starting to think about concepts like purpose, legacy, impact. Like, what the hell am I doing here? What do I want to tell my kids about my life and what I've done? And I realized that I wasn't, at that point in time, going to be particularly comfortable or happy about the story that I had to tell about my life. If I was telling it to my kid, or if it was my obituary, or God knows what. I thought, I need to do something about this. I'm not okay with continuing to live the way that I am. Now, I'm often can be a little bit of an extreme person and make some pretty drastic changes. And I now, realize with the benefit of hindsight that the pivot I made at that point was probably a bit too extreme. But the thought process behind the next step was essentially that I've always had a passion for like food and cooking, and I've always been interested in that. I'm deeply passionate about, the environment and sustainability, like being outdoors, camping, hiking is kind of my happy place. And, I love, engineering, designing products and creating things. So I basically, overlapped all of these different areas and thought kind of food, sustainability, design and creating. And I became very interested in, urban gardening and food systems. I'd actually discovered a guy named Michael Pollan around this time who wrote a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma that talks a lot about, food and food supply chains and how, our food choices are impacting the world around us. And I came to realize that although I, thought I was being a responsible citizen of planet Earth, there was a number of things I was doing that were kind of mucked up. And, the way I was thinking about food and food choices was not, consistent with my values about, sustainability and the natural world. And so I thought, okay, this is interesting. I started exploring it. Spent a lot of time looking at the vertical farming business model, hydroponics, indoor agriculture, that sort of thing. For a whole lot of reasons, I determined that was not an interesting business to go into, and I could kind of see that that business was always going to struggle financially. But I met my subsequent co-founder while I was doing my MBA, and he was a plant scientist. Anyway, we got talking, hanging out. He'd spent a lot of time looking at how to incorporate plants into urban environments, and we kind of together became very interested in this idea of bringing food production into urban environments, and also influencing how people interact with food and the appreciation that they have of where food comes from. Because the reality is that when humans become more engaged with their food, whether it's through cooking it, growing it, just, shopping for it at the local farmer's market, like the more engaged you get with your food, the better the food choice you tend to make, right? It's when you click a couple of buttons on your app and just get someone guy rocking up your door. That's usually when you happen to make pretty crappy food choices. But when you're more engaged with it, you're likely to make better choices. So what we were really about and trying to achieve is to favorably influence the way that people were thinking about food choices. And we were doing that by building products that help them basically grow their own food in their own home. So we had like microgreens kits, mushroom kits, like mini fruit and veg kits, a whole lot of hydroponic supplies, that sort of stuff, which are really all about kind of providing an experience that brought people closer to their food.
Yeah, that sector is really fascinating to me. If you think about the you think about kind of the problems with traditional farming based in, fields, rural areas and whatnot. You've got a couple of big things, right? Like you've got the amount of miles that the food has to travel to get from the farm to whatever the distribution center is, and typically your energy inputs for that transportation process are going to be fossil fuels, right? So you've got a ton of CO2 emissions that are coming out of the transportation network from that, just to get it from A to B. If you very much oversimplify this and get out a cocktail napkin and say, what would be the reduction in CO2 emissions from growing food locally in a vertical farm that's in a retrofitted skyscraper or a purpose-built, 3-story facility, maybe something that's retrofitted from a warehouse environment. Pretty quickly, you start to see, you could reduce those transportation emissions drastically. But the big sticking point with vertical farming and with indoor farming, hydroponics, greenhouse, whatever, is the energy input costs, right? Because it takes energy to fuel those grow lamps, that lighting, because the sun, not 24 hours a day. And every time I've looked at a business case for that, that's the one thing that makes it all fall apart. Just does not work on that. But like you're kind of talking about, looking at a distributed system where you're saying, okay, instead of trying to centralize the production of food into one vertical farm or one facility, what if we can encourage people to do more gardening and more production of food in their home environment using the resources that they kind of already have on a smaller scale? You look at one apartment unit, 3 people living in it, the impact of that, it's not going to be a whole lot. But when you multiply that over 3 million households, it gets a little bit more substantial and a little bit more significant. So what did you in that business come to in terms of impact? Like, did you start to get some traction? Like, where did you find the success points in what you were trying to do with that business? And also conversely, where did you find the failure points in what you're trying to do with that business?
Yeah, good question. And you're absolutely right about a lot of the issues around energy intensity and embodied energy, and not just the electricity for the lighting, but also the materials for the warehouse, the concrete that you need to put the warehouse on. Like there's all embodied energy there. So we did a few things. First of all, I had recognized that the indoor vertical farming model was, not only challenging from a sustainability argument, but I think there's a number of, cost dynamics there that were very challenging. And we also kind of came to the realization that the greatest impact that we were going to have was not through the direct action of like supplying food, i.e. delivering a box of lettuce or basil or whatever, but instead the way that we could influence the way people think or their relationship with food, right? The basil or the herbs or the mushroom kit that I might be able to help you grow, it might only be a garnish or a small part of Saturday night's dinner. But as a result of having had that experience, and now understanding the process of what it takes to grow mushrooms or basil or lettuce or whatever in your home, it then forces you to think differently about every other food choice you make. So the next time you're walking through the supermarket, you may be taking a couple more moments to look at the ingredients list. You're asking questions about like, is this stuff actually in season? Is it realistic for this to have been grown locally at this time of year? I think it's something like, 10 companies control about 85% of the food that gets consumed in the US, right? And it's just terrifying when you start to look into where our food actually comes from, how it's produced, and the incentives that the people have who are actually doing that, right? If you look at the incentive model behind the people who are supplying most of our food, it's not life expectancy. It's not your body mass index. It's not your cholesterol level. They don't get rewarded for any of that stuff. They get rewarded for profitability and shareholder returns. That's how they get paid, right? There's nothing to do with your health or wellness that determines how food executives get paid. So, do you really want to be fed by someone whose primary objective is to make as much profit out of you as possible? And, we kind of came to the conclusion that was a pretty messed up system. And that's partly why we wanted to do something about it. In terms of the impact that we had, we looked at ourselves and thought, what, this is a noble endeavor and all well and good, but we would be absolutely, mortified if we learned at some point in the future that despite our best intentions, we're actually doing worse than the status quo or the alternative. So there were two things we did about that. First, we went through the B Corporation assessment. You might have heard of B Lab, B Corp. Some companies have that B Corp logo. It's basically a certification that proves that you have incentives beyond financial, right? You have to commit to having some greater, corporate purpose and mission in order to get that assignment. The other thing we did is we became certified carbon neutral. So we actually looked at the embodied energy of all of our products, all the plastic, all the packets of seeds. Like, we looked at where everything came from, figured out its energy intensity, and then, determined the carbon footprint of our own company and figured out how to offset it. So it's like, okay, we've kind of relieved our guilt. At least we know we're not doing any harm here. Now we can focus on doing good. I guess what I learned from all this process is I think we did, an okay job of product and supply chain and, bringing things to market. My partner and I are both engineers, and, the product numbers operation side of things, I think we did pretty well at. Where we really struggled, both as a business and frankly, me personally, is with the marketing and, customer acquisition side of things. We went at this for far too long with these noble environmental, like, we want to make the world a better place type mission. But what I came to realize is that stuff doesn't sell. People don't wake up in the morning going, oh my God, I need to lower my carbon footprint today and, be a better citizen of planet Earth, right? Their needs, wants, and desires are, I hate to be crude, but like often a lot more just benign and materialistic than that. It's like, cool, I want to have this fun experience, or I want to give my friend a cool birthday present, or, I want to feel good about myself before I, go to yoga in the afternoon or something. And what that did to me, we had one particular product which basically turned a wine bottle, an empty wine bottle, fill it with water. It turned that into a hydroponic garden. And so you could basically grow herbs out the top of an old bottle. And we thought this is, a cool introductory product. But what we came to realize after a while is that our customers didn't see it as something that was revolutionizing the food industry. The customers saw it as a stocking stuffer for Christmas time. And I'm like, God damn it. Like, I went into this to have an impact. I wanted to, make a difference. I want to do this, that, and everything else to the food system. And here I am making freaking stocking stuffers. Like, really? And that, that was really hard to deal with as an entrepreneur and founder, when you realize that the problem that you're solving for your customers is quite different to the one that you set out to solve. And in our case, it was usually not in a favorable way, right? It was, quite frankly, kind of demoralizing to realize that. Like, I didn't get into this business because I wanted to make freaking stocking stuffers. That was, kind of where we found ourselves a number of times. And so, that for me was probably the hardest part of it.
Yeah, I mean, to circle back to the crudeness, like the unfortunate reality is that the majority of people make shitty decisions unless the better decision is as easy or easier than the shitty one.
Yeah.
There's it's interesting you talk about customer acquisition and the challenges that are inherent in it. It's so true in that space. There's a company here in Toronto called Just Vertical that has designed a series of, they're really meant to be consumer grade automated hydroponic systems. So they're meant for equipment size kind of living spaces where you might have kind of a 4-shelf hydroponic system that's you call it 3 feet wide sort of thing. And you can grow enough fresh produce using their kits or your own seeds for, a couple of months at a time sort of thing. and they've been doing well, but it's the same problem that you ran into. How do you acquire more customers? And you can't just rest on your future growth being people who have a very deep values connection and alignment with you. That just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And the other thing that really kind of stood out for me with what you said is, we talk about aligned incentives in the food system, and the incentives that food executives of the 10 large companies in the U.S. that control the food supply mostly have. And you can kind of look at most Western economies, and it's the same sort of thing. Small number of companies with large scale, deep pools of financial capital and resources. They control the majority of the food supply. There's that very classic case that most people probably even still study in business school, where Monsanto got themselves into some hot water with seeds that were designed to basically self-destruct after one season. So farmers couldn't save seeds. They had to keep going back to the well season after season after season to buy more and more and more seeds. That's an example of that kind of incentive system being completely disaligned from what's good for people versus what's good for profits, right? It's this time immemorial story that we keep on reliving in various ways, and your experience fits into that as well. Even though you set out to do good with what you were trying to accomplish with your partner, I mean, like, good for you guys. What was the end of that story? Like, you were in business for a few years, sort of thing, and just kind of quietly shut down. Did you sell it? How did it all play out?
Yeah, so we were in business for like 6 or 7 years, and I learned so much about entrepreneurship, business, and myself. I think having been through that, I developed a huge amount of empathy and understanding for, the people who are now my customers. We were a bootstrap business. We never had millions of dollars in the bank. So, I know what it's like to stress about payroll. I know what it's like to have to hustle at the last minute to figure out how you're going to finance your next purchase order. I've solved all of those sorts of finance, cash flow sort of problems for myself. And that has been hugely impactful. At the end of the day, like, we did okay with it from a cash flow and an income perspective. Nothing life-changing. Like, I'm not retiring and sitting on a beach drinking margaritas or anything. So it was okay, but certainly not a life-changing outcome for us. But by far, the most value I got from it was really about just learning and education. I not the sort of person who does well learning things theoretically, through books and watching other people. Like, I'm an experiential learner. I need to do it myself. And just being thrown in the deep end and having to figure out how all of the numbers and math behind an e-commerce business works and what it takes to keep it afloat and scale it and grow it. It's just, I don't think I could have understood the industry the way I do had I not been through that as a founder and operator.
Yeah. And that's one of my mantras with, myself and all of the clients that I work with, is kind of the very simple realization that you learn more from failure than you do from success. If something just like knocks it out of the park and it just works and everything is great, what do you learn from that? Keep on doing the same thing. But something completely falls apart and just does not work. You naturally go into this period of introspection and you start asking yourself the really hard questions. What happened? Was it me? Was it the market? Was it some sort of externality? Was it an operational process? Like, what the fuck went wrong for this all to go so sideways? And through that process, and business owners and people who build things, they're naturally deeply invested in what they're doing because they have incentive to be so, right? They take those lessons to heart in a very serious way that other people do not. So, folks at home, don't be afraid of failure. Failure is not the end of your journey. Failure is just one step in the road. It's an opportunity to be better, to strengthen what you're doing, your skill set, your capabilities, and to take that into the next time. I want to ask you, Nate, if you could give, Nate from 10 years ago, one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'm going to reflect back what you just said. I mean, that what you just described is literally how my view towards growth and startup and entrepreneurship has evolved. When I was, 10 years ago, I didn't, I was terrified by the idea of failure. I didn't like it. It was embarrassing. It was humiliating. Like, I didn't want to have to go tell, my family and friends and network that I'd screwed this up. And it was, something that I was, I guess, afraid of failing. For my second business, Future Ready, I've now come to appreciate the benefit of failing. And I have intentionally designed some tasks in a way to make me fail. Right. So I've done, rushed, rapid launch, like doing client webinars, for example. Right. So promote a webinar, get people on, get them to sign up, do a webinar, do it all real quick, do it in a way that is almost going to be embarrassing to myself. Because if I put myself in that situation, it's like, okay, I got 2 people to show up and no one bought my damn product at the end of the thing. It's like, okay, I've now learned a whole lot of things that didn't work. I now know how not to advertise it, how not to get people to actually show up. I now know how not to share my slides during the thing and what I shouldn't say. And I actually intentionally design processes now to try to force myself to fail frequently and rapidly, because I appreciate that failing is a critical element in the learning process. And the more I fail, the quicker I can fail, the faster I'm learning and the quicker I'm getting to where I want to be.
Yeah, it's that's really interesting. You are probably the first person that I've talked to on the show, or kind of elsewhere, who has said, I intentionally try to fail. But it makes a lot of sense. In software development, especially like very, very critical systems development, there's this concept of red teaming. You have a dedicated team that goes in and their job is to break stuff. Their job is to make things not work and come up with the scenarios that might seem far-fetched and absolutely crazy, but could happen. And if the outcome of that is really sufficiently bad, even if it's like that 0.1% edge case, you need to plan to adapt to it or to prevent it. So this sounds a bit like that, which is really interesting to me. Do you put in place, when you're going through that process of intentionally trying to fail on certain things, do you put in place like guardrails or things to kind of mitigate the downside risk that your experimental failing really fucks stuff up? How do you go about that?
Well, the nice thing about when you start and when you make these mistakes is that they're not big mistakes, right? Like, yeah, you might make an idiot of yourself on a webinar and look like a little bit of a fool, but you know what? There was 2 people there. So like, who cares? What I do is I'm very disciplined with like recording it and documenting everything. So on every single webinar I've done is a line on a spreadsheet. And I can see, how many ad creatives did I have? How many impressions did I get? How many people signed up? Of the signups, how many people turned up? Of the people that turn up, how many were my ideal customer? And so for every, iteration of the experiment, for every failure, I have data. So I can see, what is the improvement process. And if you're rapidly going through this process of experimenting and, making a bit of a fool of yourself, like, at least you can get comfort in the fact that your metrics are improving. By the time you've been through 4 or 5 iterations, like, my numbers are 5 times better than when I started, because I've learned all of the things that don't work, and I've learned how I need to prepare properly, and I know which platforms I need to promote on, and so on and so forth. So I think, I guess the offsetting force here is just having a way to track your own process, because that makes the process of failing and making mistakes, I don't know, it makes it feel irrelevant. Like, I don't care if I'm failing because I'm progressing here and I've got the data to prove it.
Yeah, and from an emotional standpoint, if you're going into kind of those experiments saying that I'm going to get something positive out of this, no matter what happens, it kind of softens that blow a little bit.
Yeah.
You start to feel less like a complete cock up and more like someone who is just progressing on the path, right?
Yep, absolutely.
There's another kind of question that I wanted to ask you, more so about your work today with Future Ready. Do you do any work with them kind of in this vein? So you're focusing on the finances, and a lot of the time it sounds like from a more strategic perspective, really digging into the operational layer of the business and troubleshooting different problems. But do you touch on with your clients this concept of failing with purpose and failing forward in a way that's controlled?
Mm-hmm. We do. A lot of what well, not a lot, but a part of what I do with clients is figuring out how to improve the odds of the bets that they want to take. So an example would be, we want to launch this new product because, X, Y, and Z reason, we think it's going to be great, and here's why we need to have this product. I'm like, okay, cool. I get it. I understand what you're trying to achieve. If we get this right, then, okay, this product might be worth, I don't know, $500,000 a year in sales. If we get it wrong, then it's also, pretty expensive because we have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of inventory that we can't sell, and probably too much debt, too much interest, blah, blah, blah. So let's look at the steps involved to actually get from where we are now to have this product in the market. And let's understand where the big risks are in that process. So is there a risk that we are going to be able to design this product? Well, no, we have a designer, we're subject matter experts, we know how to source it, we know how to get all the components we need. Like, the risk of bringing the product into life is fairly low. We can do that. Cool. Is there a risk that we're going to be able to finance this product? Well, no, we've got good operational cash flow. I can help you with a line of credit. We can get financing. We've got investors. We've got cash, whatever. So no, I don't see that as a risk either. Is there a risk that we're not going to be able to actually sell this product once we've manufactured it, once we've sourced it, once we've got the inventory? Okay, there is. There is a risk here that people may not want to buy this thing. So what can we do to address that risk before we have to do the investment in product development and inventory? Could we, for example, just put a random listing on our site, right? Just do some AI, make some mock-up images, pretend that we have the product in stock available for sale. Maybe we could run ads to it. We could see how people click. Maybe we even get people to buy it and enter their credit card number. Because if we can drive cold traffic to this site, get people to add it to cart, and then buy it and give us a credit card number for it, then we're onto something. And hey, yes, we might have a few awkward conversations when people go, hey, where's that thing that I bought? And you have to say to them, I'm sorry, it doesn't exist. Or you could tell them you got a supply chain problem, or let me give you a free upgrade to a better product, right? There's ways that you can deal with that. But what we've done there is design an experiment that might cost, less than $1,000 to execute on. But we've saved ourselves a month worth of product development costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of inventory. And by doing that $1,000 experiment, we have addressed the greatest risk that this whole thing was going to work. So that's just one example of how you can basically, reframe things and get people to approach problems differently in a way that rebalances risk and reward and puts risk and reward in your favor. Because that's really all business is about, right? We're investing something, either time or capital, and we're wanting to get rewarded for it. And as long as the rewards are greater than what you put at risk, then your business is going to grow. So what we need to do is figure out how to make the risks as small as possible relative to the rewards that we generate. And that's a big part of what I do with my clients.
Well, that seems like a very natural segue into kind of our wrap up for the show. And each guest is on here. I tell them, hey, give us the elevator pitch for your business, including how we can get a hold of you, what your website is, all that good stuff. Take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you want the full elevator pitch? Like as if I'm doing an intro here?
Let's do it. Let's put it this way. Let's do the elevator pitch, assuming that the elevator is not like the 105-story elevator at Freedom Tower, but more like a 30-story elevator.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, well, my name is Nate Littlewood. I'm the founder of Future Ready CFO, where we support early stage, purpose-led founders in the e-com and CPG space achieve their business and financial goals by bringing clarity to their numbers and showing them how to use financial data to make better decisions. Unlike a lot of other CFOs, I've actually walked the walk. We've spent a bit of time talking about that today. And essentially what I do is through content, courses, and one-on-one coaching, I am on a mission to make finance education and support more accessible for startup founders. And ultimately, what I'm aspiring to do here is put an end to the current reality that finance and lack of finance education is the number one reality that these businesses fail. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm all about.
And website, LinkedIn, all that stuff. How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so best social channel is LinkedIn, Nate Littlewood. I'm on there pretty much every day. That's the easiest place to find me. The website is futurereadycfo.com, and you'll learn more about the products and services there, as well as there's a couple of places to get hold of me.
There you go, folks. You have it right from Nate's mouth. Don't worry about doing the pause, rewind thing. I will put links to everything in the show notes for you. If you want to talk to Nate, that's where you'll find all of the stuff. Nate Littlewood, thank you very much for joining us on the show. It's been a fantastic conversation.
I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to The Journey in Conversation. If you liked this episode, follow or subscribe so you don't miss the next one. More builders, more breakthroughs, coming soon.